Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be back at La Grua. I was here 11 years ago, thanks to Tracy Chevalier's novel, Girl with the Pearl Earring. Opened up an opportunity to cash in big time. The slideshows, I have 3 slideshows that I'm using tonight, and they're all available. If you email me, I'll give you the link within 5 minutes, and you can download the slideshows if you want. They're apparently making a video for Connecticut Humanities channel. I'm sure it won't go viral. We're going to look at gardens. Every time I spent another 6 hours revising this, and every time I revise it, I get more and more types of gardens. Now I'm up to 7. Each of these types of gardens is linked, like all art, linked to an audience and a patron class. That there's artists, and in the period that I'm talking about, 1400 to 1700, all art is pretty much defined by 3 groups of social elites: the church, very wealthy, of course, the church, the aristocracy, from emperors and kings down, and the slowly growing burgher class, which doesn't really emerge as a major force until the 17th century, although it's already there in the 15th century in Florence. Think of the Medici. When I say burgher class, I mean non-aristocratic urban elites, bankers, merchants, people who pay for art. I can't collect Rothko. I'm not David Rockefeller, but I just have a poster, $20 poster. Bankers, lawyers, merchants, doctors, judges, professors, thinkers, writers, and so on. Burgher culture. And burghers only took power in the 17th century in one country the size of Connecticut, the Netherlands. So pretty much through the 17th century, aristocrats and the church call most of the shots in art and literature and music and architecture, pretty much anything you can think of that's tied to culture. And gardens. So we're going to look at gardens to some extent as a blank screen onto which different social groups project their values. And that's true of all art. All art is the projection of the values of the person who paid for the art and the audience that is intended for that work of art. So if you go to the Sistine Chapel, you have not just Catholic culture, but you have papal culture. Okay. Here's a quick preview of the 8 types of gardens. A burgher garden of the mind. Burghers can't lay claim to blue blood, but they can lay claim to noble mind if they're educated. This really belongs at the end of my talk, but there's a dedication to someone coming up in this first part of Burgher Gardens of the Mind. This is a very minor category of gardens. Gardens are usually tied to love and pleasure and power and wealth. If you're at the Garden of Versailles, there's 10,000 people there, living there. Gardens of the mind, church culture, gardens of paradise, for example. Gardens of Mary in a female enclosed garden, or a garden of chastity. That's one of the most common in the 15th century. Gardens of chaste love in the 15th century, but after that, there's very little chastity in art. Once we get to 1500 and the full revival of classical culture comes, you have nudes from there to there. And Michelangelo is the leading culprit along with Titian. Michelangelo for male nudes, Titian for female nudes. So gardens of chaste love, 15th century. It will come back in the Gothic revival of the 19th century. The pre-Raphaelites were big on chaste gardens. But they're basically going away for about 300 years after 1500. Gardens of lust heading for hell. This is rarely shown in court culture, but here's one famous painting made for a very high ranking, but the highest ranking person in the Netherlands at the time. Gardens of lust are much more common in burgher culture, because the garden is so commonly associated with aristocratic love, courtly love, which by the way is usually adulterous. Lancelot and Guinevere, true love, adultery. Tristan and Isolde, true love, adultery. So in burgher culture is, of course, knows what's really going on, which is courtly debauchery, pretending to be noble. So the garden of lust is very common in burgher culture, but mostly in prints, and I'm not going to show them because they're kind of boring. Aristocratic gardens of sexual delight, this is what we get everywhere in the 16th and 17th century. As the chaste garden in court culture goes to sexual. And then formal gardens tied to the aristocracy. Of course, the Medici. If you're wealthy enough the Medici bankrolled a lot of kings. They had a lot more money than most kings. So you can be a burgher and be very wealthy, but for the most part, the formal garden comes out of court culture, and it's tied to wealth and power and other things you might show off in your garden. And we're going to end with burger gardens of the middle-class virtues and family values. These people don't look like burghers, they look like aristocrats, but they're burghers taking on courtly airs, which is very common. And the best example of this is Vermeer. Vermeer is burgher art going courtly. Vermeer has almost no burgher subjects. One maid working, pouring milk, otherwise it's very fancy, educated, refined people drinking wine, having a polite conversation and playing their courtly music and reading their courtly love poems. There's no work in a Vermeer, except for the one painting of a maid. The work ethic is gone in Vermeer. It's mostly about leisure and refinement. And that's why these burghers are already looking courtly here in the 17th century. Let's start. The intellectual garden. And by the way, most of these gardens, except for the Paradise Garden, ruled by God, of course, the Paradise Garden, and the formal gardens, which tend to be for male princes like Louis XIV. For the most part, our gardens are going to be intensely feminine, and we're going to see this over and over, so I'll leave it at that for now. So the primary garden, the intellectual garden, is primarily ruled by men, only because intellect has been defined by Western men until right now, probably to some extent, and certainly into the 1920s, as intellect is male. Mind is male and body is female. It's a very old hierarchy. That's why women couldn't vote until the 1920s. They weren't considered rational enough to make decisions. They couldn't get credit cards until the 1950s, and so on and so forth. So, primary garden, the intellectual garden, usually ruled by men, but not always, as we'll see. Here's a good example of this garden of philosophy. It's a Holbein woodcut in a book of political philosophy, Thomas More's Utopia. And there are only men in this garden, because philosophy has been described fairly recently as the most sexist discipline in all of academics, because mind is traditionally male. Another 1540 Italian garden of philosophers. There is a woman in the middle, but I'm not quite sure how she got in there, but she's there and she's in the middle, and she's in the front. So, but mostly everyone else is male, which is not a surprise. Melancholy Greek. Here's a 1628 frontispiece to a philosophical book, and it has the famous Greek philosopher Democritus, who was known for his melancholy. So there's the melancholy philosopher in his garden, retreating from the world into his noble thoughts. Occasionally, the garden of intellect is female, which is going to lead to the dedication of this talk in just a second. Here, the Italian manuscript illumination is probably that big. The Muses and Pegasus in the garden section. And where the heck is Apollo? Because normally Apollo is the star. There goes our sound. Apollo is the star, and the Muses are backup singers. They're really subordinated in Renaissance art in almost every image of Apollo and the Muses. And Apollo is missing. Maybe he was off trying to rape Daphne, which is going to come up later. It's a garden thing. Like most of the gardens. Here, Minerva, goddess of wisdom and chastity, expelling the vices. And one of them is Venus, representing lust, because Venus can represent good love and bad love. This is 1500. A garden ruled by a powerful, armed woman is kicking out all these male and female personifications of lust and debauchery.
So who's up with that clouds?
Virtues. Yeah. Everything is allegorical. Minerva stands for chastity and wisdom, and Venus stands for lust. In this case, not in Botticelli's Birth of Venus, but by the way, none of these mythological figures or any other motifs have a stable meaning. They have a range of meaning and a potentiality for meaning, and the artist can change it if they want to. It's artistic license coming back. I mean, and there's no art in the Middle Ages, there's only craft. No one is considered an artist in the Middle Ages. They're menial workers, and they're looked down on. The idea of art is embedded in the Italian Renaissance, and it's all about the artists redefining themselves as high mind over base body. We're not craftsmen anymore. In fact, we can look down on craftsmen now. Maintain a woman in charge of a garden. an armed woman, kicking butt, let's put it that way, because we're getting videotaped. And right behind her is the woman that Apollo tried to rape, Daphne, turned into a laurel tree right here. That's Daphne. Turned into a laurel tree and saved from that rape attempt. The goddess of chastity, defending a chaste nymph who's in the garden. This garden is going from a garden of lust to a garden of feminine wisdom and virtue and chastity. And this raises the question, why would anyone want such a thing in a highly patriarchal world as the Italian Renaissance? And the answer, Isabella d'Este wanted it. She's the patron. And she's the most powerful, educated, independent woman in all of Renaissance history. Isabella d'Este. Thank you. Thank you, Isabella. She was known as the 10th Muse, and I'm sure she was called Minerva as one of the many flattering things they'd call her. She also showed herself in a different painting by the same artist as Venus subduing Mars. So she's I'm not showing, it doesn't have enough garden. Here's Correggio, Minerva, triumphant in a garden. Another version of this. Minerva, goddess of wisdom, the garden of mind, a female mind. The academic world is one of the only places until quite recently where women could rise fairly highly, and only in the last 30 or 40 years. Women's colleges, sure, women presidents. But only in the last 30 or 40 years have women become presidents and high-ranking officials like dean of the faculty at lots of colleges, including Connecticut College. I'm dedicating this lecture to Danielle Aiken, the dean of the faculty at Connecticut College. One of our best dean of the faculties ever in my 40 years. She's a psychiatrist, which probably helps her to be a good dean of the faculty. Once you get tenure, you can be as crazy as you want and they can't get rid of you. And she's just been appointed president of Bennington College, so I was hoping I might get her, but I'll send her the YouTube video. This is her new official Bennington College website portrait, and I'm glad to say she's not in a boring study with books behind her. She's in a kind of garden. On to the sacred garden, the church garden. God as Christ, the paradise garden, the monastic cloister garden, and Mary as an enclosed garden. Let's start with the paradise garden, which is sometimes, let's skip that. Let's skip that. Christ tends the garden of the soul, a 15th century manuscript drawing. Christ tends the garden of the soul. Christ is the gardener. We can go back actually for these two. Christ is a gardener after he's crucified. He comes back as a gardener. The first person he shows himself to, he's appearing as a gardener. It's Mary Magdalene. He doesn't show himself as a gardener to anyone else, which suddenly strikes me as interesting. The first person he shows himself as a woman, and he shows himself as a gardener. There's his gardening tools right there. Here's another 16th century version of the same thing. Christ the gardener. And there's a formal garden in the background, which is a new thing coming in the 16th century. That has nothing to do with Christ, you might say. And nothing to do with Mary Magdalene, and everything to do with, look at my fancy formal garden in my painting. I may not have a real formal garden, I may not be able to afford one, but I can have a painted version. Here's Christ. Here's an allegory of the mystical bride. You may not be familiar with the Catholic idea of mystical marriage, but it's in the Bible. All human beings are married to Christ. He's the bridegroom, and we're the bride. It's very clearly spelled out in a number of biblical passages. Above all, in Canticles, which is in the Old Testament, but it was understood as referring to Christ the bridegroom, and the bride is the human soul or the virgin or some other woman connected to Christ. Here's the bride hunting Christ in a garden. And Christ is the deer, which also comes from Canticles, Song of Songs. And it's in an enclosed garden. In other words, a chaste garden. The mystical marriage, if you read the poem in the Old Testament, there's nothing chaste about it. It's a highly sexual poem, rated GP, but it's only about 10 pages, so if you're flipping through the Old Testament, it's very easy to miss. But it's probably the most influential text in the Bible from the 14th century on per page. These bridal soul hunting Christ in a mystical marriage is by definition chaste. So all the sexual metaphors in the Christian imagination get turned into it's chaste kissing, it's chaste breasts dangling like clumps of grapes. It's the most a famous example of this mystical marriage is Bernini's St. Teresa in Ecstasy. And that's about as close as you can get to something which is not chaste. Here's Christ, his holy blood, it's kind of Christ the gardener in a different way. Christ crucified in a garden with his blood dripping down and washing the bride. Washed in the blood of the Lamb as well. And there's the soul's garden, the bridal soul and the soul's garden, watered by Christ. 15th century, 1500s, so on the verge of the 16th century. Here's the 17th century, the heart consecrated to Jesus is the flourishing garden. Your heart, my heart, anyone's heart. This is Catholic, this one. Eden, paradise. Paradise lost, regained. It's fairly straightforward. There's a big ceiling fresco in a church in Germany. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Paradise. And let's just add one comment because there's not much to see how the garden is circular? I think this is pretty common from depictions of Eden. It's a cosmic garden. You might say the Garden of Eden is the world before the fall. So it has the cosmic circle.
So what, go back to that.
Yeah.
What are all the faces in the tree on the
That's Christ up there. I can't.
No, on the right.
I can't even see them from here, so. Very convenient.
Cheers.
I don't see any faces.
Right at the top of the floor.
Okay, sorry, little faces, yeah.
Okay.
They're in the ornamental margins. And when you get to the ornamental margins, you can put anything you want. You can have a jousting match, and then underneath the crucifixion, you can do it. If you look at medieval manuscripts, there's the main scene that's sacred, then you have ornamental figures on the sides, and the artist is completely free to do almost anything, including obscene things in sacred images. And Bosch is going to take that ornamental freedom and make it the center of his art. A typical paradise garden, 1415, temptation to fall of Adam and Eve. It has a few other things. There's God ruling over the garden up there. There's the creation of Eve. That's where things. The creation of Adam isn't shown. The creation of Eve is shown because we're blaming everything on Eve, like Genesis does. Genesis makes it very clear that Eve took the apple from the serpent, Adam did not. The serpent seduced seduced Eve, and Eve seduced Adam. And the punishment for this, of course, is also spelled out. All women have to obey their husbands from now on, God says in Genesis, because of what Eve did. Paradise Garden, the Benozzo Gozzoli fresco, 1460, so it's probably 1.5 times bigger. This last thing is this big. It's a manuscript, so size is good to keep some sense of size in mind. This is the Medici Palace in Florence. It's a paradise. There are two of these. They have a private chapel. Raise your hand if you have a private chapel with frescoes at home. And often in these scenes with paradise gardens, angels are busy gardening, collecting flowers, clipping flowers. Here's Rubens in the 17th century with another paradise garden. This is, I think, our last one. And this is going to disappear, this paradise garden, for the most part, and only come back in the pre-Raphaelites in the 19th century. But by the way, the paradise garden and Adam and Eve in general is the only place where medieval art and before this Renaissance explosion in nudes, where medieval art could have naked figures. And actually there's two places, Adam and Eve and hell. There are shocking images in Giotto's hell. Monks tortured by their genitals, no problem. You can show anything in hell because it's in hell. It's not sinful. Once you put it in hell, you have carte blanche to pretty much show almost anything. That's the cloister garden, a double enclosed sanctuary because the monastery is already a walled sanctuary, and within every monastery there's a cloister garden in the middle. So it's like this, the garden is the symbol of monastic retreat from the sinful, corrupt world heading to hell. The monks take vows of chastity and poverty. Right? Let's put it another way. The monastic ideal is contempt for the world. Contempt is one deed. Contempt for the world. The world is fallen. The world is heading to hell. There's little hope for redemption in the Middle Ages, outside this world of monks and nuns sworn to chastity and poverty. I considered taking a vow of lifetime chastity when I was arriving as a freshman in college, but I decided against it. Every monastery has a cloister garden here. Here, it's San Marco in Florence, not the one in Venice. That's my wife a little bit more back. My favorite cloister garden is not in this lecture. This is part one of a three-part lecture on gardens. Part two is 18th and 19th century, and part three is early 20th century, Franz Marc, deer in a cloister garden. The last time I checked, deer are not found in cloister gardens. That's a separate lecture, but I have to show this wonderful painting. It's about this big. It's in Munich. The same society that elevated the cloister, the monastic ideal of holy poverty and holy chastity, retreating from the world into your communal life in your monasteries and convents, the same society also regularly mocked monks and nuns as lecherous, greedy, I have one other vice, gluttonous, thank you. My short-term memory is disappearing by the minute. And this is a manuscript illumination, so about this big, and it shows on the left, it shows nuns shaking sexy, handsome monks out of that tree. And on the right, monks are shaking the tree to get those nuns down. There's a whole category of obscene literature, all meant to be, all comedy, in the late Middle Ages about the sex lives of monks and nuns. So we'll leave it at that. By the way, this is the only thing like this that I know. For gardens, it's a very rare subject to have monastic lust and lust. Who cares who wants to see gluttony and greed when you can see lust? Okay, church culture varies the garden. This is probably the most common in the 15th century, more than even in paradise. Although many of these Marian garden scenes are basically paradise gardens with Mary thrown in. The scripture, again, Canticles, the Song of Songs, it says, "The garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse." And the Song of Songs it's in the Old Testament. So, first of all, if you know it, as you probably know, everything in the Old Testament is interpreted by Christians as referring to the coming of Christianity. But if you're Jewish, you know that's total nonsense. There is no mention of anything Christian in the Old Testament. There can't be. The Old Testament cannot be replaced by a New Testament. That's the Christian idea until the 1950s. Christianity rises from paganism on one hand and Judaism on the other, and it replaces both of them, renders both of them obsolete. But back in the Christian mentality that produces these things, they see the Canticles as referring to the mystical spouse is often the virgin, but sometimes human beings in general, Christians in general. And the same chapter in the Old Testament, Canticles, refers to the spouse as a pure lily, the rose of Sharon, and the rose without thorns. All these are applied to Mary. Here's a catalog of Mary's symbolic titles, not all of them, but many of them, including the first four are tied to gardens. It says, you can't read it, but it says enclosed garden in Latin right there, hortus conclusus. There's the enclosed garden, there's the lilies, there's the roses without thorns, and there's a fountain. 4 garden themes for the Virgin Mary. And then we have other things like the Tower of Chastity, the Star of the Sea, the Gate to Heaven, and this is another fountain outside. All references to Mary. Oh, the spotless mirror. Mary's a spotless mirror. All from Canticles. Here's a 15th century manuscript, so about this big maybe, Dante's vision. Thanks would be a tree shade. It takes him up to heaven. Dante's vision at the very end of the Divine Comedy of Mary in an enclosed garden. It's a cliche, Mary in an enclosed garden. I can show you 50 of them, but just show some of the better ones here. When Mary is in a landscape in the 15th century, it's almost always a garden or an enclosed garden. Here's some examples. I'm not going to say much. I'm not going to say anything about most of them. I'll show you some examples. Most of these paintings are this big or this big. They're for the home. They're not for church. Very few are altarpieces. There are some. Altarpieces tend to show Mary as the Queen of Heaven on a throne. In other words, as a powerful figure. When you put someone in a garden, it's a more intimate and more personal, more human approach to Mary. And that's why these paintings are small. They're for the home. And when you have saints in these gardens, they're almost always female. The garden is feminine. This is another feminine garden, ruled by Mary. She fairly frequently, even though she's sitting on the ground, which is another theme of Mary's common humanity, they often show her with a crown. She's the Queen of Heaven, even when she's in the garden. She rules over the garden. Here's a close-up of that painting. This painting is in Worcester. This painting right here is on the right is in Worcester. And the angels are doing more gardening around the edges. Here's two more. 15th century. Both show the Virgin with a crown. Here's another one in Hereford. They have two. So this is an Italian.
Many of these have a lot of color. In the 14th and 1500s, what were they? I mean, we know some of the colors, but I've seen blues and reds and greens and yellows.
Yeah, well, late Gothic art is very colorful and decorative. And it's, if you go to Orvieto, and even some of the other Gothic cathedrals in Italy, they are full. The Duomo in Florence is a good example. It is made of colored marble. It is not simple and plain. Let's put it this way. The Catholic Church is not known for simplicity and plainness. It's known for ornateness, splendor, wealth, glory, magnificence. If you take away color, the image loses a lot of its interest and impact. This is this big. It's in a manuscript, so you can take your garden literally in your pocket. Gazebo, I think, is really it's a 15th century development, and they get more and more common and more elaborate. In the 16th century, you can walk through 100-yard long gazebos in formal gardens. Here's a good example of one of the smallest and one of the best of these 15th century Madonnas in a garden. She's wearing a crown. She has female saints on the left, 3 of them. There's one male saint, St. George, and a St. Michael the Archangel. I don't know why you could be an angel and a saint, but the Pope decides who's a saint, so, the Pope can bend the rules a little bit. Anyway, they're in a closed garden, again, the Garden of Chastity, but they're also, as you can see, they're all courtly. This is a perfect example of the courtly love garden overlapping with the sacred garden of Mary. She's reading, and only about 10 or 15% of people in Europe can read in 1415. She's literate, she's beautifully dressed, she's upper class. You can say, well, Mary was poor. She had nothing. Joseph had nothing. But she's also the Queen of Heaven. So if you want to stress the poor Madonna, you can, but she's usually in Catholic art not poor. In fact, from the 12th century on, Mary in Catholic culture is the Church, and the Church is Mary. Most Gothic cathedrals are Notre Dame's. Gothic cathedrals are not places, architectural displays of poverty, let's put it that way. And one of the female saints, also an aristocrat, a real aristocrat, St. Catherine of Alexandria in red. By the way, there's another fountain. Gardens almost always have fountains. Catherine of Alexandria was a princess, a saint of the early Christian period, is giving Christ a music lesson on a stringed instrument. He's not playing a vulgar bagpipe, is he? There's hierarchies in music, as there are in everything else. So an aristocratic music tutor for the young child, right? You want him. Connecticut, my office in Connecticut College is right next to the music department, and there's always kids from well-to-do families getting their private piano lessons every day. Okay. Chaining the appetites of the lusty, gluttonous monk. We want to skip this, but there's a monk, I don't say monk, I meant monkey, sorry, monkey. There's a monkey there. Right there. That was that. He's not happy. He certainly doesn't belong in the garden. Monkeys are often, not always, depends on the context. If it's an art allegory, monkeys represent the artist imitating nature. Monkey see, monkey do. If it's a garden, a purity, a chastity, a monkey is tied to lust. It's been chained up or captured or subdued. Subdued, like the dragon. There's the dragon, another beast that's been subdued by St. George. Here's the unicorn tapestry in Paris, one of the 6 unicorn tapestries in Paris, and there has a chained monkey. As the pure maid subdues 2 other beasts, the unicorn, which is a savage male beast, and the lion. Just to give you some little context for monkeys. And here, 2 15th century images, 1 16th century, I'm sorry, but around the same time. Women leading men on leashes, and men are shown as disgusting, lusty monkeys. They're not actually men, they're monkeys, but there is an allegory for how women literally lead men around. That doesn't happen today. Mary is the rose, the mystical rose, the rose without thorns, the rose of Sharon. This is in every possible medium that you can think of for the period. Here's a musical score with the rose of Sharon in the middle of Mary. Here's the rose windows are often focused on Mary, not always. Sometimes Christ is in the middle. But many of them are rose windows with Mary. There's a Notre Dame, and this Mary in the middle, you can't really see her very well. And on the outside of the same window, a sculpture of Mary, just to underscore this. You can never have, this is Notre Dame, you cannot have too many Marys in the Church of Notre Dame. There are probably 100 in this cathedral. Don't forget, Mary is the church by the 12th century. That's why all these churches are dedicated to Mary. You probably know the type of Mary where she's gathering the little faithful under her robes. Mary is the church, gathering the faithful together. Here's another Mary is the white celestial rose from Dante. There's a wonderful German Renaissance painting before early Renaissance, Show. It's a rare altar piece with the Madonna in a garden. Mostly they're smaller. I think we're going to skip the golden doors. Maybe not. In the interest of time, yes, I'm skipping that. Okay. But Mary is the door to heaven. Mary is also the door to heaven, and those gates are like a door. And Mary is often at the door of Gothic cathedrals for that reason. Just a couple of close-ups so you can see Mary in a rose garden. This is one of them. When I first saw this painting, I wasn't expecting anything. I was on my way to see something much more famous, and I didn't even know this was there. I stumbled into the church on the way back to the train station. I'm an atheist, and I fell to my knees. It made such an impact on me. Musical angels all around, and she's being crowned in heaven. It's a spectacular painting, especially if you see it in church. If you move this painting into a museum, it is severely compromised. It loses much of its spirituality, unfortunately. Most religious paintings are now in museums. In the early 16th century, we moved away from Mary in the closed garden as Renaissance art gets much more pagan, much more worldly. And the landscape setting, which will now be common, is pastoral. Pastoral comes from Greek pastoral poetry and pastoral art. Pastoral meaning shepherd. It's not about the sacred. Well, of course, it could be Christ is the good shepherd. But here, let me show you what I mean. Here's the Madonna in a garden, and here's the new pastoral Madonna in a pastoral landscape, complete with 2 shepherds. There's a shepherd sitting here with his flock, and a shepherdess over there. 1510. The enclosed garden is bye-bye. 2 transitional Madonnas right at this moment, 1500, 1550. Durer's Madonna in a garden, Grunewald's Madonna in a garden. But the garden is reduced, it's not a big wall anymore, it's just a few railings. And the pastoral landscape opens up behind it, complete with sheep here. The Annunciation to the shepherds. Sure, it's religious, but it's also pastoral. Christian pastoral. What better way to sneak in pastoral than to find Christian subjects? And there are lots of Christian pastoral subjects. Christ the Good Shepherd and the Annunciation to the shepherds especially. And the Grunewald's painting is similar with a pastoral landscape behind. And there's the church of Heiligefrau, or whatever the German is for Mary. That's a Notre Dame right there. And there's the sculpture of the Virgin at the door to heaven, the door to the church. This is the best example of the pastoral Madonna, I would say, in the 16th century. Titian's Madonna of the rabbit, it's a nickname. And there's the shepherd right behind her. That's not the good shepherd. That's not Christ. It's a regular shepherd. And rabbits, nature's fertility. The Virgin's sacred fertility, but now in somewhat worldly terms. That's what the High Renaissance is. It's a more worldly, the early Renaissance is a more worldly Christianity. The late Middle Ages gives us a more worldly Christianity with new naturalism coming. And this will only continue right into the 17th century when Caravaggio shows the sacred as wretched beggars and commoners for the first time. untraced gardens, and the threat to the feminine bodily realm. From Notre Dame on, Satan is sometimes shown as a young woman, a lot like Eve, bare-breasted, giving Eve the apple and looking at Eve. This is on the facade of Notre Dame in Paris. Here's a slightly later, more than slightly later, a couple hundred years, a Flemish garden paradise, and Eve is a woman just like, they go to the same hairdresser, as you can see. That's Satan as a woman giving the apple to Eve, and then Eve gives it to Adam, and he's subordinated, and he's kneeling, and not in feudal, not in courtly love like the noble suitor kneels to the beloved. He's submitting to Eve. In the next scene, he's going to blame Eve. He's pointing at her, he's going to blame her, but it's too late. He's now. They're both condemned to death, and everyone after them, because of what Eve did. In this feminine garden ruled by Satan, here. It's interesting that Satan was God's right-hand angel. I'm not quite sure how he. Let's say on that. This is the 1480s manuscript, so again small. And the right there's the Virgin as the new Eve. It's very common from early Christian writing on to see Mary as the new Eve, and Adam and Christ is the new Adam. It's a theological cliche. The Virgin is under the tree of knowledge, and she's giving out life in the form of the Eucharist. And Eve gives out death in the form of an apple to all mankind. And Adam, poor Adam is just sitting passively with a phallic snake winding around the tree. We'll see it again in a different context. The feminine garden emasculates great men. Well, Adam and Eve is one example, but here are 4 more examples. Samson and Delilah. Samson cuts off Delilah. Delilah cuts off Samson's hair to take away his strength in bed or in their bedroom. The Bible makes this very clear. It is not a garden theme. It's a bedroom theme. And the sexual castration theme is pretty clear. When you put this in the bedroom, especially with a man's head between her legs, which is partly how the courtly lover always lies, as we'll see in a minute. And Montaigne on the right has moved this into a garden as one more way to blame women. Because the garden is, in this particular case, is a bad garden tied to lust and female treachery, like Eve. There's a print before Montaigne showing this. It's not the garden theme isn't asked about, but it's a garden, definitely the beginnings of the garden theme. And the night lies in the lady's lap, asleep. Why men fall asleep in bed? Sometimes. Here's the courtly lover, almost always lies in the lap. This is a cliche right through the 19th century. I've got a whole slideshow just on this motif. And the grapevine twisting around the tree, does it not recall the serpent in the Adam and Eve story, which is very frequently shown winding like that. And if you have any doubts, let me show you a close-up of the inscription on that tree, which says, an evil woman is 3 times worse than the devil. 3 times. What about 2 times? 674 times. This shows how miserable life was for women at this time. If they're worse than the devil, no one can be worse than the devil. Except, apparently, an evil woman. And of course, the primary evil woman is Eve, and everyone else after is a daughter of Eve. Here's a wonderful example of something else that never takes place in a garden, which is relocated. The Judgment of Paris is an allegorical garden. The Judgment of Paris is a pastoral theme. He's a shepherd. He's out there with his sheep and his sheepdogs in Botticelli and every other image. This is the only image where he's in a garden, where this thing is moved to a garden. He's a shepherd, and the 3 goddesses come along, and there's some squabbling over who's the most beautiful, and he has to decide. A beauty contest. Outside Troy. He's also a Trojan prince. Like most farmers I know, he's also a high-ranking aristocrat. We'll leave that to a second. To talk about pastoral. So Paris here is shown as a parody of a contemporary nobleman, overdressed. It's like, look at him with peacock clothes. He's the most beautiful person in this painting. Forget about the woman. Look at me, look at me. You can imagine. He's like a Narcissus, almost. And he's definitely made fun of. He's got this sheep guard dog with him. I don't know who this man is next to him. Let's not worry about that. And he's approaching the garden, guarded by a woman. It's a woman's garden, and women are in the garden. And that woman is nature, natura, like Mother Nature. More general, not mothering, but nature. He's a lot fancy. His dress is a lot nicer than hers. And if you look at his dagger, he's ready for action when he gets into the garden to see Venus. There's Venus. She's naked. This is, by the way, this is the late 15th century, very end of the 15th century. It's one of the few examples of nudity. Even in mythological art, there's almost no nudity until the 16th century. The other two goddesses, Juno, goddess of wealth, and Minerva, or Pallas, Athena, goddess of the mind, are there as well. But we know what's going to happen. He's going to give the apple, the prize, to Venus. And she bribed them. They all bribe them. This is in classical literature. They all bribe them. Juno offers money, Venus offers wisdom, Minerva offers wisdom, and Venus offers the most beautiful woman in the world, who happens to be married. But that's no problem. Helen. She's not Helen of Troy. She's Helen, the wife of a Greek king. So when Paris kidnaps, elopes, or the word raptio in Latin means abduct and rape. So it's sort of like an elopement. He kidnapped Helen, takes her back to Troy. Then the Greeks attack Troy, and that's the end of Troy, and ends up in Paris. By choosing Venus, Paris destroys himself in one of the great empires in literature, Troy. And we can blame it on Venus, if we want. Or we can blame it on men who are ruled by Venus and ruled by lust. From the classical period on, this is very frequently, not always, but very frequently allegorized as a moral choice between wisdom, wealth, and pleasure. And Paris chooses the wrong one. Odysseus is a sex slave for two women who have magical powers and who bewitch him and keep him on islands. This is the most famous of them. Calypso, or one of them two, the other was one of them too. This is a 17th century painting. Odysseus imprisoned in the grotto of Calypso. It's a garden grotto. Grottos are not really normally gardens, but you could develop a grotto into a garden. And if you have a man, a great hero, imprisoned in a garden of a sexy, witchy woman, I wonder what Freud would say about that. And a Renaissance epic, Tasso's poem, Orlando Furioso, also has playing directly on this scene in Homer. The hero, the warrior, imprisoned by a sexy, witchy woman as his love slave. And there he is like a sleeping beauty, deprived of his masculine verticality, put it that way. That's another example in the 17th century, even more of a sleeping beauty here, the man. I'm thinking about the crackdown on women in our military, women and female leaders. On the traditional idea that if women are in the military, all men are emasculated and weakened and our fighting force is diminished. It's really something that comes out of a certain male imagination, to put it that way. Narcissus. Narcissus is a classic example of a man who's feminized with beauty, the feminine theme of beauty and fashion, and he falls in love with himself by looking at a reflection in a pond. It's an outdoor subject. It has nothing to do with gardens. It's an outdoor subject in the woods, but it's also brought into a garden theme. Again, you can do anything you want with these subjects within reason. Fortunately, the fountain of reflection that he has is not marred by green algae sometimes. Narcissus was the first looks maxer. Clearly, Narcissus had no interest in women because he was too busy dolling himself up and upgrading his Instagram account. Washes courtly garden. I need to keep an eye on the time. This will go to 10 o'clock. We're on the first slideshow. We might skip this and just say, The Bosch's garden is very clearly a garden of lust. There's paradise on the left, hell on the right, and world, the panoramic worldscape in the middle, going way back into space. And everyone in that painting is sinning sexually. That's the only kind of sin that really matters in this painting, and they're all going to hell. But the viewer isn't. The man who commissioned this painting, the ruler of the Netherlands, commissioned this as courtly pornography masquerading as Christian allegory. That's my summary. You can entertain it too. You can condemn the world of sex while enjoying it with 300 or 400 naked figures doing all sorts of interesting things that would take you hours to look at them all. Find them. Women are women are the ultimate forbidden fruit in this painting. They often have apples or other fruit on them. There's a lot of fruit fetish. Here's a siren, like the ones threatening Odysseus. An upside down siren, and an upside down world with men upside down. More upside down figures. 3 of them marked by arrows. An upside down couple. More upside down figures on the right. This image does not need any commentary. My theory is that Bosch had a secret fetish that no one really knows about. It's the fruit fetish. Raise your hand if you have a fruit fetish. Okay, that's the end of slideshow 1.